Welcome to Surviving with SheRich, the talk show where we help those silenced by trauma regain their voices. I'm your host, Dr. Sherry Richardson. Join my guests and me as we share inspiring stories of resilience and practical steps toward healing within a supportive community. Thank you for tuning in, and let's get started on this empowering journey from trauma to triumph, surviving to thriving, one story at a time. Welcome to Surviving with SheRich, the virtual talk show where we help those silenced by trauma regain their voices. I'm your host, Dr. Sherry Richardson, and I am really excited today to be able to have the guests that I have on. We know that June is Father's Day. We love to celebrate our fathers during that time, and I thought it would be fitting for me to actually have a Father's Day episode. And so the gentlemen I have on today are so fitting to the title of this. This episode is called Forged Fatherhood, from Loss to Legacy. And when I think about the word forge means to form something, but it's not by regular means. It is by using intense heat, by hammering, or through the use of pressure. And so when I think about the gentleman that I have on here today, it is so fitting because their road to, or their journey to fatherhood was literally tried by fire. And so you guys have endured the heat, you have endured the blows, the heaviness, and even when life felt like it was caving in on you, you endured the process. And so I am so honored to have each and every one of you here today. I want the audience and our guests to welcome my friends, my brothers, my husband, who are here. We have Joe Richardson, we have Chris Benson, and we have Herb Kemp all with us today. So we just want to take a moment to welcome each and every one of you to Surviving with SheRich. I usually open up my show and I talk about like how I met everybody and how I know everyone, but I really want to just hop into it. What I think is amazing to me is the fact that when I look in this virtual space, I have literally known all of you for many, many years, actually decades when I think back. And so, our friendship turned into a brother sisterhood of over 20 years. Chris, we worked together, which I can't believe was 20 years ago. As I know, right? Time flies, and then
They sure do.
known each other, but now we are married. And so I am just the connection that I feel, and my heart is just so full because I feel like God gave me a front row seat to each and every one of your stories. And so I know what you've been through. I cannot wait for you to share with the audience what it is that you have endured. And so Chris, I'm gonna start with you when we talk about, fatherhood. Obviously, it's something that you're embracing now, but your road to fatherhood was not an easy one. And so if you could just take a moment and just kind of share, what that pathway or what that journey was like for you and your wife as you guys attempted to step into parenting with some obstacles and some difficulties.
Absolutely. So first off, thanks for having me here. Appreciate having this platform. Hopefully my story and everyone else's here can, really shine a light for folks and help people um, process whatever it is they're going through. But yeah, you're talking about forged fatherhood. Mine definitely felt forged. Um, Kind of hard to know where to start because I've always wanted to be a dad. I've been super blessed to have some great male role models in my family, in my life, through the good friends I've met along the way. It's just something I've always been surrounded with and always was a goal of mine. So um, to, you know, to be in the situation where I get to celebrate my first Father's Day as a dad this year is, really special, something I definitely do not take for granted. Particularly, how I got here. Definitely was not an easy path. Um, so I guess the first uh, place to really start was I guess the loss. Like, always felt like something was missing not being a dad. Um, but never want to rush anything or have something happen before you're ready or before it's time. Um, but unfortunately, my wife and I, we did suffer a miscarriage, and the way it happened was extremely traumatic. Uh, so I guess the first place to start when talking about it is just that it came as a complete surprise.
Hmm.
We were um, just home one day. My wife was not feeling well, started feeling really ill. So we ended up going to the hospital. Long story short, found out we were expecting. This was like they're like a Wednesday or Thursday night, middle of the week, just kind of on the almost on the humble, like, oh, let's go get some nausea meds or whatever we thought. And she was just not feeling well, so we thought it'd be, simple as a hospital visit could possibly be. But come to find out, the doctor said that we were expecting. So this was on a Wednesday. Just the shock and not even settled in. We're happy, we're scared, what to expect. Just sort of in the midst of processing everything. And then a day or two later, we ended up having to go back to the hospital because she still wasn't feeling well. And it was at that point where, unfortunately, we found out that the child did not make it. They couldn't find a heartbeat. So within, I want to say at most a 72-hour span, went from the elation of thinking, life's about to change, about to be parents, totally out the blue, wasn't expecting it, um, to just having this tremendous sense of loss just kind of, dumped in our laps. Like, didn't have, you know, just there wasn't time for the processing. I don't think she went to a regular doctor even. It was just a complete 180 within a matter of a couple of days. So it's,
So the emotional roller coaster in that short period of time was probably overwhelming, I'm
yeah,
sure,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. It's even hard to, like, talking to you guys now about it. It's hard to even,
Right,
still imagine it happened, to process it, to, think that this was a real thing that happened, in our lives.
right.
Um,
So for you, was it you experienced one miscarriage?
mm,
Okay. And then after that, what was the process like? Because obviously you still wanted to be parents, you still definitely were moving forward with um, attempting and trying. And so, what was that process like after you had experienced that loss and saying, you know what, we still believe and we're still going to try again? How was that experience for you?
it was definitely difficult time. When you're dealing with a situation like that, you feel very vulnerable. It's hard to, at least in my case, it's hard to even like process it, to express to other people what happened. Um, you feel damaged. You feel, all sorts of negative thoughts can come creeping in. So basically, it was a time where I was, feeling like very hyper aware how my wife was feeling, trying to pay as much attention as everything that's happening in doctors' appointments, things like that. But it created a ton of anxiety, I guess is the best way to put it. You
Right,
know, especially, coming, despite all the great male role models that I've had throughout my years, you still get caught in those, kind of stereotypical thinking of, wanting to put your feelings to the side, or, really, nothing happened to me. You have, all sorts of wrong-headed opinions were popping into my head at the time. So
right,
really, focusing all my time and energy on, supporting my wife, making sure she was good, making sure that, I was there to be an advocate if I needed to, you know, just, um, yeah, just a difficult time. And again, it was like such a whirlwind, like everything was happening so quick. It was hard to really process it beyond the fact that, oh, I need to be strong for my wife in this situation.
And I think when I think about your story and all of your stories on here, that is probably a commonality that we are going to hear, because oftentimes when you experience that type of a loss, whether it is a miscarriage, which is a loss of a child, whether it is the actual loss of a child, and we'll get into some stories as well regarding that, the first thing or mode we go to is she okay? Is the mother okay? And we have to constantly remember that there are two parents involved who have their own set of emotions. However, as we know, most of the time, our fathers are the ones who, or their men are the ones who, like you said, we have to bury this so I can be strong for her. I know that to be true, and it's probably going to be a commonality for that. I'm going to shift a little bit. Joe, your stories are similar, but a little bit different. So, talk to me a little bit about your journey, because you actually had a healthy child. You were a father, and then experienced the loss in the middle of your two children. So, although your story is probably very similar to Chris, it has some differences, I'm sure. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yes, first I just want to say thank you for allowing us to have this as a way to help us, to continue to help us deal with grief, but also to help men understand that grieving is natural.
Mm,
And my story is I had a son early on in life when I was in the military, and then I got married afterwards. And me and my wife at the time, we tried. It was several miscarriages, and then finally, she was able to hold a baby for an extended amount of time. Um, she was a high risk, um, pregnancy woman, and so you know, each day that went by, we were concerned about the past or the history of miscarriages. And so the further along we got in the months, of course, the better we felt. And it was just going to the doctors around in the eighth month for, a checkup, and they could not find a heartbeat. And so, they tried multiple times and they kind of just didn't want to say, you know, that the baby had actually, passed, but it was like, it's no heartbeat. Let's just give it a day or two and, come back and we'll see. So we went back and there was still no heartbeat. And, again, the baby, um, who we had already had the name for, Jasmine, um, who lost her battle. But the thing about that is, due to the fact that my wife at the time was 8 months pregnant, she still had to go through the birth.
mm,
And when you talk about devastating, when you talk about trauma, um, it was a great trauma. And for me, um, as a protector, you know, I just had to step in and make sure she was safe, make sure that her feelings were guarded. And it was easy for me to step into that role because, as men, a lot of times when we are young kids, we're told men don't cry. If you want to cry, I'll give you something to cry about. You're really taught, a lot of men are taught not to feel your emotions. And so, dealing with that as well as childhood abandonment, I really locked into putting on those masks of not letting my emotions show.
mm,
I was in jobs, I was in the Marines. You see death and violence, you have to shut down and keep the mission going. I was in corrections. You see all kind of type of things. You shut down keep the mission going. I was in law enforcement as a police officer. Same thing. A lot of stuff you have to block it out and keep moving forward. So for me to block that out and still function became normal for me. And that's one thing that we all suffer from as men. We allow it to become normal. Society kind of tells us and directs us it's normal to feel numb. It's not normal to feel numb. And so a lot of times we deal with pain in silence. We deal with hurt in silence. We deal with anger in silence because of family history, because of just different things that we do. And it was extra hard because after, the stillbirth death, my wife at the time, if the phone rang, she would just get nervous and frantic. If we went out and we were out at a grocery store and she saw a baby or a pregnant woman, it brought on another set of emotions. And so at any given moment, I had to step into that protector role, that encourager role, that supporter role. And it really did not give me time as a father to grieve. And actually, I think a lot of men think that it's okay not to grieve, but so much hurt and damage is done when we do not allow ourselves to grieve.
Let me ask you this question, if you don't mind me interjecting for a minute. At what point in time did you come to grips or even begin to process or allow yourself to feel grief for the loss of Jasmine?
It was a few years ago. Actually, you and I had gotten married, and around every Christmas, I would get real somber, real sad actually. And you ended up being a good wife. You ended up asking me what was wrong, and I explained to you. And you ended up getting an ornament with Jasmine's name on it, and that began to allow me to walk in healing, to start that process. And so every Christmas, that's one of the first ornaments that we put on the tree. And yes, I'm still affected by it, but it allows me to just be able to release that. It allows me to be able to celebrate, that tragic moment. And so I thank you for just having that heart and just being what I needed to help take me to that next journey of healing.
Excellent. And I think, in a situation like that, even when you talk about the miscarriages, a lot of times we do press that down. And but at the end of the day, it is a child and it is a loss. And so finding for you, it was finding the opportunity to be able to memorialize her and to remember her, because for the longest time you did not.
Yes.
And I know that you had some feelings of regret behind how you handled or how you managed the loss of her.
Yeah, that's so true. In my particular case, again, trying to be there for my wife at the time and just make sure she was okay. Um, I remember when the doctors came in and, my wife at the time, actually had the baby, and then they kind of brought her in for us to see. And they asked if we wanted to have an autopsy done, and I said no. They asked if we wanted a funeral. I was like, no. Um, and still to this date, I do not remember or know the date of her death.
Mm.
And so that still is another layer of pain that I still deal with. There is a certificate that is somewhere, but I'm not sure where it is. But I'm just thankful to God. I've always been a strong man of faith, and my faith has allowed me to be able to just to deal with the different levels of death. Um, I had death of probably the greatest woman in my life at the time who raised me, which was my great great grandmother. I never grieved that. And so my father passed, never grieved that. My mom passed, never grieved that. And so actually being able to grieve my daughter really opened the door for me to start a healing journey of decades of grief that I never even dealt with.
That's good. That's good. And again, I see the commonalities in both stories. I'm going to shift a little bit to Herb, who you have a similar but different story as well. The
Yes.
commonality here, obviously, and I'm sure as you share your story, we will hear about the miscarriages, which all of you have experienced. But your journey is a little bit different because not only did you experience loss. Chris's loss was on the front end. And then you had a beautiful baby boy. Joe, yours was in the middle. And then Herb, you had loss at the front end, but continued grief, an overwhelming pain after your children were born. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity to share your story as well, because again, there are some similarities, but a little bit different. So talk to us
Okay.
about your journey and your fatherhood.
Okay, definitely first, again, just thank you for this opportunity to share, share with other people who've been through similar experiences. And I hope this blesses someone out there to know that you're not in it alone. So when you look at this title of Forged Fatherhood, like I said, it's kind of like similar to Chris. It's something I always desired. No, one thing I always desired was to be a father, to be that good husband, be the father. So once I got married, we took some time to get to know each other, and you feel like you have time. So when you've decided it's that time, your timing to start to plan to have a family, and you think that everything's going to just go according to a plan. And there's definitely a plan, but just not our plan.
Right.
So it started on our first pregnancy. And like I said, we was elated, excited, everything going according to plan. You make the first doctor's visit, and everyone remembers that first heartbeat. And hear that first heartbeat. You see the first sonogram, and you kind of start to feel that experience. The excitement's building. And then, like already's been said, you go back to the doctor, and that heartbeat is no longer there. And you just get this feeling like, okay, kind of questioning, what do you mean the heartbeat's not there? So then when we left the doctor's office, they were saying, okay, that there was nothing that they could do besides, go home, and saying that the embryo will probably pass during the night. And that when you go to the bathroom, that's probably how it's going to happen. So you go home, and I just remember that night just sitting there with my wife, who I would say is one of the strongest women I know. And you just see this person that, took a vow to protect, to cover, to do everything for. You see her in this state. And I think some advice I got from someone I respected was be there for her. No, it's not really about you at this moment. So as we're laying there, then I remember, no, not sleeping, just laying in bed and holding her. And then she got up and went to the bathroom and just said, and I think the words was kind of like, it happened. And I think it was just like a numbness that just came, what words do you say to this person who, mirrors strength every day and that you're trying to uphold, but I just became numb. So we're just staying there, sitting there, laying in the bed, staring at the ceiling. And that was the first miscarriage. And it was just like I said, just starting the feeling of numb. And then you go through the process. And I can say one thing that from that first miscarriage and through this journey, God has always placed a village around us that, to support. But even sometimes when you have people to support, you're in such a state that you can't receive the support that you're getting at that time. So it went from that miscarriage. So we waited, you talk, you pray, be encouraged by people, and you decide that, okay, it's still something that you want. So then we get pregnant again. And once again, at this point, it's maybe 8, 9 months later. So you're still kind of not over from the first one, and you're trying to be happy for the second one. So, you get the pregnancy test again. And then the same thing happens, another miscarriage. So at this point, you're still kind of going through, and there's a lot you don't understand. So a lot of times when we look at the word trauma, we can understand sometimes trauma can be chronic. It's not just that one event, it's over a course of events. So then after the second miscarriage, once again, it starts to weigh on you because you have faith, but still you're trying to process what's happening. And when you have faith, you start to question God. And a lot of people just don't come to that realness of saying, okay, God, I'm living for you, I'm serving you. Not that I'm entitled, but I have questions.
Yes, right.
And some of the answers and encouragement you're getting from people, just be honest, you just don't want to hear it, because you want to hear it from God. So then you kind of go through the second miscarriage. And then you kind of realize that, okay, you're still going to do it. And then you say, okay, you go through that process again, more trauma onto that. And then you get to the third pregnancy. And at this time, you feel, okay, we find out that we're pregnant with twins. So now you're saying, okay, hey, God, you're, paying us double for what we've lost. You're saying, oh, you got a word, you got the encourage, you got everything. And then it was, okay, went to the doctor. The first heartbeat was gone.
Mm.
So you're still holding on to hope because there's still one heartbeat left. And then you go to the next doctor's appointment, and then you realize that that heartbeat is gone. So at that point, once again, what do? It's not just the first, the second, and then it's almost like saying, okay, you ask a question to grieve. You're saying when, because you're trying to be encouraged. You're trying to be hopeful. You're trying to speak life into every situation. But still, you realize that you're almost at the point you're holding on with everything you got, but still, it's taking everything out of you.
Mm.
So then we still decide to try again. And at this time, I can remember every doctor's visit, just numb, just going to the doctor, whereas most people can say, hey, these stories of joy and everything else. I'm like, no. I remember every doctor's visit was just holding it together, just trying to make sure my wife was okay, trying to make sure everything was okay, and just holding it together, still functioning, but not living, not feeling anything, because I just felt that way. The best thing to do is to just go through being numb.
Wow.
So you get
Something that was supposed to be like, like you said, most of the time it's supposed to be a joyous occasion. The
Mm-hmm.
excitement comes, and it's like, what you think about and what you remember is all of the different growth
Mm-hmm.
processes and the baby bump and all of these things, but it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like none of you could really, really enjoy that because it
Mm-hmm.
was the anxiety of, is the baby still going to be breathing? Are we still going to hear a
Mm-hmm.
heartbeat? And so those exciting moments and memories that you should have had literally were almost just like snatched from you
Mm-hmm.
because of the anxiousness that you felt
Yes.
anticipating, okay, I want to believe everything's okay, but the reality is it may not be. And so that emotional back and forth just kind of stripped you and robbed you of
Mm-hmm.
the joys that many people
Yes.
talk about as they're going through that 9, 10 month gestation
Mm-hmm.
period.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
couldn't agree more.
Yes.
Herb, I'm gonna fast forward a little bit because you lost four,
Yes.
the first you in a three. Your first miscarriage, your second miscarriage, and then the twins for your third. You and your wife finally got to a point where you got through.
Mm. Yes.
You had your first son, your first child, which
Mm.
was a son. What was that process like? Because for you, you weren't out of the water at that point. You were still in the process at that point.
No, um, wasn't out of the water, wasn't out of that process. And I remember even leading up to his birth. I remember, okay, you finally get to that third trimester and you start to just breathe a little bit. And then I remember on the day we went to the hospital for him to be born. And even then, the cord was just wrapped so tight around his neck. Every time that they, try to induce labor, the heartbeat, just remember the experience of a heartbeat and watching the monitor, watching that heartbeat go from 150 something down to 60, down to 40. So I remember that. And then it was like, let's rush her. And no, we have to do. So we went from that to an emergency C-section. So I went from that, being able to breathe a little bit to my breath gone, rushing into emergency C-section, and then being thankful that, okay, both mother and child came out the C-section well.
Right.
Then I just remember, then we came home from the, hospital, everyone's there, your village is there, your support is there. Then you're coming home, and I can just remember feeling like I just need a minute. I
Mm-hmm.
just want a rest, a minute, just being exhausted. And then it was day 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just we're at home and there's something coming out my son's mouth. And we're trying to figure out what it is. So my wife, who was always very diligent, we decide to, okay, just as a precaution, no, new parents, let's just take them to the no hospital as a precaution.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can just tell when you're, no, medical staff, when they're trying to figure out how to say certain things without saying it, and they're
Right.
saying, okay, we're going to call for this. And just to come to find out, that was day 6, and kind of just saying, okay, let's get you something. And you're just saying, okay, let's just talk about, let's tell me. And then, the doctors are saying, okay, basically what's happening is what you see is a result of a malrotation of your son's bowel. So we have to, go in. Now he's at that point 6 days old, surgery scheduled for the 7th day, and do surgery. And one or two results are going to happen as a result of the surgery. Hopefully, the bowel is twisted. We can untwist it and, put it back where it's supposed to be, and then, monitor him. Or if the bowel has died, all we can do is make him comfortable. So I just remember that, okay, you know, you went from, just like I said, having that breath, having that moment, now to once again going back into that shell of being just numb and just doing all you can once again to try to deal with it. Because at this point, because of the emergency C-section, my wife is still recovering.
Right.
So you're still trying now to provide, take care of the needs of your wife. You're still trying to take care of the needs of your son. So you still feel like there's no place for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I said in the beginning of this show that I feel like I had a front row seat to
Mhm,
sum up you and your wife's story primarily. Like
mhm.
God gave me a front row seat from
Yes.
beginning to end. And I remember being in that
Mhm.
hospital room
Yes.
before they had to take him to CHOP. And it was the story that came back to my mind was that of Abraham and Isaac, where he got a promise from God
Mhm,
to have that son. And it was like, okay, that promise has come. We're walking in this promise. It's been fulfilled. Everything is good, only to turn around and say, oh, now you're going to have to sacrifice him. And that's exactly what I feel like you and your wife went through. Like,
mhm,
the promise is here. We finally got through the loss of these children. We now have a child, 6 good days. And
mhm,
I was like, the thing I longed for the most, I may now have to give up. That's a heavy emotional moment for anybody. But
mhm.
as a man of God, as a person who's in the church and who believes God and has faith and all of doing all of the things, the real moment is like you said, I got some questions.
Yeah.
Why would you get us to this place? Why would you
Mhm,
bless us, in this way, only to turn around and snatch it back? And I think about many people who grieve, especially when it's a loss of a person. We grieve different things, loss of job, loss of age, our children
mhm,
grow up and they leave. So now, we grieve losses of relationships. But when it comes to a person, especially a baby or
yes.
a child who's young, the human side of you is just like, this does not make
Mhm.
sense. And,
Yeah.
and we question, God, why did you do this?
Mhm,
And I
mhm,
feel so many people go through that with losses.
mhm.
Why did God do this? So any one of you guys can kind of hop in, and how would you respond in a situation like that when it's in your face and that's what you're feeling? How do you respond to a person, a father or somebody who's grieving, who says, God took them from me?
Mhm.
Well, I think for me, being in the church and um, reading the Bible, I did have questions and I did question God. And he showed me that his own son life was taken. It was
Mhm.
sacrifice.
Mm.
And when I thought about it that way, it kind of just allowed me to just take a breath and understand that if God allowed his own son to die. I could not be so arrogant to think that something like that wouldn't happen to me. And so that's really what kept me focused on not really going to a dark, dark place. But again, my faith, it was not only strong faith, but it was long faith. Again, I told you I experienced so many deaths that I never grieved, but my faith always remained strong. God was always there when I felt him and when I didn't. When I called on him, when I became silent, he was always there. And so that's what really, helped me to get through.
Okay. I think one of the things that helped me make it through, and I think back from the beginning towards the latter part, was that part of my village, we met at the church 5 o'clock every morning for prayer. And it helped to sustain me. But I also have to just say that honesty as a man, I was still mad. I was still hurt, you know. I still had those questions of this loving God that we serve is allowing me to go through all of this. I know he's going to get the glory in the end, but I wasn't at the end. I was somewhere in that middle. And I think sometimes it was just those raw emotions. And I said, finally, it was instead of trying to frame it in a perfect way of just saying, God, you know my heart, so I can't hide it. I'm mad right now. I'm hurt. I'm angry. I'm feeling so many emotions all in one. So finally, I had people that I can just say, it's okay. He understands.
Yes.
He's compassionate. He sent this, like I said, he sent this son to endure. So he knows sometimes you're going to endure with that flesh, but you have to be real and not walk around and just say, hey, for me, it was okay. I got to that point, but it was a point to get to. I wasn't there during the process all the time. And that was being in prayer every day, praying, 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 but still feeling something of, like I said, flesh, feeling parts of me just feeling lost, feeling hurt, feeling that, okay, is it okay to celebrate the birth while you're still mourning the loss? How do you navigate both those emotions?
Wow, that's real. And I think most of the time, people don't allow themselves to be that transparent. They don't allow themselves to really say, oh, well, I'm not supposed to question God and I'm not supposed to, feel this certain way. So let me just push this down because it's, I'm wrong but you're not. It's real. That is a part of the process. And like you said, he knows. Being able to have that open, honest communication and just say, I'm sorry, but this is how I feel. And this is where I am. And I think also, and I say this to people who are supporting those who are grieving, we have to be careful with what we say, because I feel like so many times people have these great intentions, but what our words are very harmful and hurtful. It's not meant to be insensitive, but it is, right? I mean, Chris, I think about you, and you talked about, you had all these friends and people around you who were having children, and you go through a loss. How did you, I'm sure you had to try to manage those emotions of trying to celebrate other people while you're in the, and probably receiving information from them like, that was supposed to be encouraging, but was not. So how did you navigate that?
Um, well, one things that I've learned, well, first off, I was very fortunate to have a therapist I'm still working with now,
Mm-hmm.
going through that process. So I was able to really do the work in real time, which was a new experience for me. Usually, you know, going through the stages of grieving has not been that constructive for me or productive. So that was the biggest thing. But the one thing that I learned that hope everyone can get a chance to learn this is that it's okay to hold on to grief or anger or any other feeling as long as you're able to make room for other things in your life. So, it wasn't easy. It wasn't anything but time and just the perseverance before I finally get to the point where I can say, yes, I want to, go see my goddaughter, or yes, I want to see up, you know, genuinely happy for hearing updates from my nieces and nephews. Um, but yeah, that was the way I had to get through it, was to learn that lesson that, like, grief is okay, anger is okay, you know, questioning your faith, feeling shaken in your core. That's okay as long as you're able to, still see the beauty in life, see the joy in things. And, again, it wasn't like a light switch going off. It took many, many months of work, and, something still processing now.
Right.
Um, Joe, when you mentioned the Christmas ornament, that almost got me because I experienced a similar, almost the same type of thing. It took a Christmas ornament to really help me, see that, I can hold the grief in one hand and joy and love in the other.
I like that.
Yeah, that was good.
And hold grief in one hand and life, the joy of life in the other. I love that.
And, if I could, there was something that you said. You talked about joy, and I think for each of us, there's a scripture that talks about the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And for us, common thing that was taken from us during that time or during those times was our joy.
Mm.
And so grieving allows us to we can't get the time back, but it allows us to be able to have joy still. And like you just said, Chris, being able to grieve and have joy at the same time
Mhm.
it was very powerful. And so, you know, you have the baby born, but you don't have joy.
Mhm.
A season where you should have joy because you're still worried. What will tomorrow bring? Will the baby make it through the night? So you're always being proactive and thinking, and in the back of your head, that history is replaying, replaying, replaying. So you can't breathe. You can't feel normal.
Mhm.
Because you always in that cycle of preparation mode. What if that strong man got to come back to the front again? And so, again, I just thank you for allowing us as men not only to share
Mhm.
our testimonies, but to let other men know that there is a way out. There is a way to freedom. And for a
Yes.
lot of us, it starts with acknowledging the hurt, the pain, understanding grief, understanding it's okay to grieve in a
Mhm.
healthy way. But society wants to make grief abnormal.
Mm.
Mhm.
It's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And I would just like to add, like you said, grief and even trauma, and realize sometimes it is a process.
It is.
And when life is life, and there's going to be things that happen that sometimes can trigger something in you.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one time that it was just a conversation I was having with my wife, and we was talking about our son, and she said something. She said, "Well, at times when he does certain things, you just give him his way." I said to her, I said, "I have to be honest." I said, "I remember," and it was almost 12 years later that I said, "I remember in that hospital, hearing the cries that came out of him. And I said, so when he gets to something, tears start to flow. I said, it does something to me. And one of the things I have to say, you have to be honest with those people who God has sent around you to be able to trust to say, okay, you know what? I'm most days I'm good, but there's still some days where certain things happen that can trigger something
Mhm.
that, now it's on to what you've experienced. And not that you're not saying that you haven't been walking in being delivered or healed or free, or you haven't experienced some forms of joy, but something can happen. And making sure we surround ourselves with a village. And that's one of the things I'm just so thankful for, of having a village
Mhm.
or near that when life is life, and that you can always share
Yes.
your innermost secrets and your hurts, and just for that moment to get you through. And
Right.
as men, sometimes we do feel like we have to hold it all in. And I felt like for so long I held it all in till it affected me internally.
Mm.
You start to have autoimmune deficiencies within your body because your body is just saying you're carrying so much.
Mhm.
And that's what I said. And sometimes you gotta lay aside. No, like I said, it's not just, like I said, a sin. Sometimes it's just the weights that we carry. He says, lay it aside.
Mhm. Yeah. And I heard several different things that, or suggestions or resources, or, you know,
Mhm.
things that men can tap into. But if I could take you back to that, the moments where you were living this process, you may or may not be able to answer this question, but what do you think you would have needed? What if you could have anything during that time that could help you get through that maybe you didn't have? Is there anything that you would say, you know what, if I know of a man who's going through this right now, this is what I would have liked to have for myself? Is there anything, any suggestions, anything you can provide or share to them that maybe you wished somebody would have given to you as you were going through that process?
I could answer that. I think that one of the things I would definitely wish somebody would have said, and I guess, Chris, you touched on it, to get help, to seek a therapist a lot early in my journey.
Mm.
I think that, I had the support of my spiritual family, but I feel there was still some things that I needed to unpack, that I needed that professional help and assistance.
Mhm.
So I wish somebody, after that first experience, would have suggested to say, hey, here's the name of a good therapist. Go talk your feelings out, because it was so much that I carried for so long until I got to the point to realize that, hey, God has also blessed therapists in their field. So I'm like, okay, yes, God uses therapists.
Mhm.
And I just wish somebody would have told me that early on in my journey to
Right.
seek help.
That's good.
And even with um, being fortunate enough to have a therapist at the time when I really needed it, I think having access to a group like this would have been
Mm.
extremely helpful. Just being able to sit in community men and experience the same thing. That would have really, that would have been a huge benefit as
Mhm.
far as my grieving process. Because and even with having a partner to support me and having a therapist to work with, like, then you still feel isolated. You still feel like you have a unique situation, and it's really clear that, from our conversation, that there's so much in common that, you shared. It's not just getting through the moment, it's the anxiety of all the milestones, it's being up at night, worried about what could happen. So yeah, I think having like a support group of other men that experience this type
Mhm.
of loss would have been invaluable.
I
Mhm.
love that. I love that
Yes.
idea.
And I agree with both Chris and her. Definitely counseling, a therapist, because a lot of times there is a root problem that we do not recognize, and from
Mhm.
the root springs up many tentacles of behavior. And while we're trying to deal with those behaviors, we never get to what the root is. And I believe that a therapist or counselor can help us actually get to the root of the problem, which can help us along that journey faster. Also, when you talk about communities, I know, I'm blessed to be in a church that provides groups, different type of groups. And when you get in community, especially with men, men are silent. They don't
Mhm.
trust. But once they hear other men begin to share their testimonies, their experiences, then you really see how many other men suffer in silence. And so,
Mhm.
like both of you said, I think those are two powerful tools to help navigate us toward that freedom and that healing that God wants us to have in the midst of, the pain and trauma that we previously experienced.
Yeah, that's good. And what I keep feeling, and so I want to share is it's really time to rewrite the narrative,
Mhm.
change the stigma of, you know, or the titles and labels that have been put on men.
Mhm.
Because when you are able to be vulnerable, when you are able to share, when you are able to speak about and expose, and that is not a sign of weakness, that is
Mhm.
a sign of strength. And so we have to rewrite that narrative so that men begin to embrace all of the emotions that God has given.
Mhm.
And so I'm grateful that we had this opportunity to create that community, to share those stories, to expose, to talk about the positive impact counseling and therapy and community and village and all of those things have on your healing and your wholeness. And so I hope today is the catalyst in a movement for men to be able to encourage one another, to be able to support one another, to be able to share. So, like you said, Chris, so they don't feel alone, so that they realize I'm not the only story. So I thank you. Before we end this, are there any final thoughts, any final words any of you want to share with our audience, with the men who may be watching, even the women who support the men who may be watching? Are there any final things that you would like anybody to hear or anybody to know?
It's all right. And, as long as you are committed to the healing and the process, um, things will always get better.
We as men, now more than ever, our voices need to be heard.
Mm.
They need to be heard in our home, through our families, through our churches, through our communities. And if the
Yeah.
enemy can silence us in one way and keep that over us for decades, the man's voice
Mhm.
is not heard. And so I would just, ask every man, yes, we all are going to deal with life. We're going to deal with pain. We're going to deal with trauma. But on the end of all of our stories was success and great joy. that we now walk in.
Right.
God has allowed that pain to become joy. We've been able to have children born. And
Yes.
so just remain encouraged and understand that this too shall pass.
As we about to celebrate Father's Day, there's no greater joy than fatherhood. Thank you to both my son and daughter for allowing me to be your father. We're all imperfect, but we're perfectly us.
I love that.
Yeah.
And just to embrace that, not just on Father's Day, but every day,
Mhm.
whether it's your natural child or somebody that you're mentoring, as men, we have to continue to lift one another up and be there as a support system to one another.
That's good. So good. Woo. Thank you. I wasn't sure I was going to get through this episode, but I did. I
Yeah.
did.
Same.
Um,
Same.
I just again thank each and every one of you for being here. I will take a moment to say happy Father's Day to each of you. Continue being the examples that your children need. Continue to use your voices because your voice is valuable, and literally can change the trajectory of your family, of communities, and other people. So thank you so much to all of you, to my viewers who are watching. If this episode helped you in any way, if it benefited you and you know it could benefit somebody else, I just ask that you share it. Yes, I would love for you to like and subscribe, but in this moment, I just want you to share it. Because at the end of the day, if one life can be changed as a result of this particular topic, this conversation that we had, then we did what we needed to do. So thank you for tuning in again to Forged Fatherhood, our episode of Surviving with SheRich. And happy Father's Day to all of our fathers out there. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Surviving with SheRich. If this content helped you, hit like, subscribe, and share. And remember to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Dr. SheRich4.